Have you ever participated in a TV show with your kid? My favorite is Danny Go. You can find it on YouTube and Netflix. The show is designed to get kids up and moving and dancing around and following along as Danny does the same actions. If you go all in, you can get a decent core burn out of it if you're really going for it. What I caught recently while I was ill is how badly my youngest wants to watch that show. And I think it isn't so much that he loves Danny as it's something that we participate in together. We do what Danny Go does together. But then later on that same day, there's Paw Patrol. I know, Paw Patrol. I'm not all in while we watch Paw Patrol. Sure, I make sure he notices how Humdinger went wrong or the growth steps one of the pups took, but I will but I will sometimes phone scroll through emails or text or have an earbud in the other side ear from him listening to an audiobook or podcast. I'm not all there with him. And I think he knows the difference, the incompleteness of what I bring to the table during Paw Patrol, which is the exact opposite of what I bring during Danny Go. Reflecting on this simple TV experience has me thinking about how I slice myself up in other areas of my life. This isn't a screen time confession, but a walk through the screen to see what I am really doing. My son gets a father, and because the bar is so low, I clear it either way, but he knows the difference between I'm all in watching Danny Go or half there watching Paw Patrol. And I'm wondering what I teach him when I'm only half there. Am I actually passing on the one thing I don't want to? That slicing yourself up protects yourself, but you'll never be whole? Hi, my name is Jacob Pannell, and this is Faithful Fatherhood. I think our current culture is circling actually something very similar or has the same intuition. I'm going to use a popular character, Ted Lasso, which is just back for its fourth season on Apple TV, I think. And I haven't seen it yet, but I did read an article on Forbes by Tim Lemmers, one of the show's creators that helps set us up with Ted's frame. If you're unfamiliar with who Ted Lasso is, let me catch you up. Because Ted became a successful football, that's now soccer for Americans, coach in England's Premier League with a fictional team. And at the end of season 3, he walked away to return to America to be with his son. Season 4 picks up with a call to return to coaching, this time with the women's team from the same club instead of the men's team. And that sets up this question or potential fork for Ted right at the beginning. Series co-creator Brendan Hunt, who also plays Coach Beard in the show, told USA Today recently, does part of being a good dad mean showing your child you being the best version of yourself and you leaning into your mission, not just trying to make time for other people in your life, no matter how beloved or legitimate those people may be? So that's what Brendan Hunt is kind of setting up for us here. My question is, but what if the most whole thing about a fictional man like Ted wasn't a one or the other, career or family? What if it was both things, whole and undivided? Because that's a more interesting place to take the story for me, because I already divide myself, even without having a job across an ocean. I see the good thing to do, and I choose my children and my work while still showing up to each one of them with an earbud in. Now, I don't know what Ted does yet, and I look forward to watching it when we get to the dark months of winter. So I get to let Ted stand there musing upon the question, what does it mean to be whole? And how does that tie to fatherhood? To navigate this question, I go to thinkers who haunt and encourage me. And I think if we follow this thought of wholeness far enough back in our Western culture, we actually land somewhere near Socrates. Now, to set Socrates up, there were two great thinkers who had a huge debate over this idea because they could agree on almost nothing when it came to this idea of wholeness, which Socrates would later reframe as what is the most good and true thing. And so they were all kind of circling around this idea of what the most good and true thing is, so that men could be whole. So you can kind of see the connection there. The first man, Heraclitus, held that the world was ever changing. He's been famously paraphrased as saying, "You never step in the same river twice. Either you have changed or the river has changed." Parmenides, his rival, argued that change itself was only a mirage. One only needed to find the pattern in the world to see that they were unchangeable. Now, they did actually come to the agreement on one thing, and they called it the Logos. For both of those men, Heraclitus and Parmenides, the Logos was the reason and order and the foundations of the whole world. They didn't quite agree on how to get there, but they both agreed that the Logos was the most true and good thing. So for Heraclitus, it was a never changing. For Parmenides, it was a never changing. What Socrates did is he took the concept of logos and then tied it to truth and goodness. And a modern way of thinking about what that might be to say could be something like completeness or wholeness. For Socrates, it was achievable by anyone, anywhere, at any time. They simply needed to be what they were meant to be. The logos was worth the whole pursuit. So for Socrates, you didn't need to be some philosopher searching out the deep truths of the world to find the logos. You could do it as a blacksmith. You just needed to be the best blacksmith you could be. You needed to be a whole blacksmith for Socrates. That was your truth and goodness. And so you can kind of see how our culture maybe brings that into today. But a few centuries later, one man completely actually changed this article and how we could understand the term. So if you have been noticing as I talk about logos a lot, the Christians in the room might already be thinking about the famous passage that begins the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. That word for word is logos. So the author knew the debate and then dropped this opener. The most good and true thing, the abstraction of hundreds of years of philosophy that everyone had kind of agreed to chase, was no longer an idea, but a body. The idea became a he, Jesus. Now, Jesus didn't just show up as a person, though. Later in that same gospel, Jesus will say, "I am the way." And that word, way, also has a philosopher attached to it. His name was Aristotle. Aristotle was obsessed with finding out how to get to the truth. So he called that his methodos, from meta and hodos. The word hodos there means way or path. Today, we call it method. So think scientific method. Like that's what Aristotle is kind of famous for kicking off, this idea of methodology. And that's still kind of the best way to read Aristotle today. It's not to hold on to his specific observations today, but to hold on to how he crafted his methodology. And that's why we still study his rhetoric and his logic, because those methods are still as valid today as they were over 2,000 years ago. Now, meanwhile, Jesus offers the same term, hodos. That's his "I am the way," but he nuances it differently. Instead of having a methodology that gets us to the logos, like Aristotle was trying to do, Jesus is the logos. Jesus embodied the good, true, and whole way. But here's the interesting twist about the Gospel of John, because by most accounts, it was the last of the 4 canonical Gospels. Now, that means much of his audience probably already knew the story of Jesus, who had been crucified and resurrected. So, John, right at the very beginning of his Gospel, is going to tell us about the Logos and lead us to how we crucify it. Not because we mistook it for something else, but by choice. John will steadily remove the doubts throughout his gospel. He's starting off with closing off the path of ignorance. You could look at the path of expedience and see someone like Peter, the rock of the church, and how he follows that same path, denying Jesus during his trial, denying the Logos. Maybe we crucify the Logos to relieve pressure. Pilate certainly took that route to avoid a riot of the Jews on his watch. But I think in the end, the reason is that we want things our way instead of the right way. John, the author John, showed us how Jesus lived the Logos because he was the Logos. Now, that is a lot of philosophy in a very short amount of time. And there's a tiny human living next to me who wants this wholeness. He wants it from me because I am his father. And if I live that wholeness, then he knows he has permission to live it too. And he can accept himself because I can accept myself. And we have each other. And that is good and true. And I've even proven he can have that wholeness in a few simple moments of watching and playing Danny go. My youngest will even try to engage me by telling me about why he loves Rocky's inventions, or by shouting out the answer when Chase is on the case. I see him offering his whole self up. Still, I reach for the earbud because it's Paw Patrol and I'm tired. Seriously, those kids had dentist appointments this week at 7 a.m. Oof. And I redirect him back to the show, away from me, because I think I'm using my exhaustion as a cloak. I don't want to give him my whole self, nor do I want to receive his whole self. And so my youngest resettles into his own shell. I know the Logos, and I choose the earbud. Now, you may be thinking, it's such a small thing. He's zoning out watching Paw Patrol anyways. But I've learned that the small moments, while none is necessarily crucial, add up. And to me, that means I'm probably doing this elsewhere. I'm bringing partial versions of myself to multiple arenas in my life. And that ultimately leaves me without an answer for today. But a question for you. Where's the place in your life that you know what's right and good and true? Maybe even the place you've proven you can give your whole self and you hold back. There's no judgment here because I had the earbud in yesterday. Let me know by responding to this video in the comments. You can find everything at my Substack, which will also be linked in the description. Thank you. My name is Jacob Pannell, and this is Faithful Fatherhood.